Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Elliott School of International Affairs here at George Washington University. My name's Jennifer Cooke. I direct the Institute for African Studies here at the Elliott School, as well as the Master of International Policy and Practice, accelerated master's program for mid-career professionals for any of those interested. We're delighted to be hosting today's event with the Institute for International Economic Policy here at the Elliott School. Today's conversation with His Excellency Ronald Lamola, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa. I want to welcome the Minister and his delegation here to Washington, to George Washington University. George Washington University and the Elliott School. Very warm welcome to you. We're very much looking forward to our talk today. We're in a moment of international uncertainty as global again is under threat. There are doubts about the vitality and how well democracy can deliver. There's political tumult the world over, major conflicts in Sudan, in Palestine, in Gaza, Israel, in Ukraine, and elsewhere. So many challenges that we're dealing with in the world today. Not to mention the looming threats of climate change, environmental degradation, and so forth. These are things that require international cooperation and robust alliances and engagement to be dealt with. So we're very, very proud to host you here today. The minister represents a new government of national unity formed after the parliamentary elections of May this past year, where the ruling African National Congress in the lead since 1994 did not win an outright majority and joined with other parties to form this coalition. I think one of the big questions on our minds is, does this signal a change in South Africa's foreign policy outlook and engagement with the world? South Africa went through a tumultuous election, but came out again with flying colors on the other side. As we head into our own election season, we're also keeping our fingers crossed. So maybe we can take a few lessons from South Africa on that. We're delighted to hear from the minister on kind of particularly on the U.S.-South Africa relationship and how he sees that, but also South Africa's much broader outlook, both within Africa and the region and the globe on these big challenges that we all confront. And Mr. Minister, welcome and welcome to the podium. I'll turn the floor to you. After some brief remarks, we will have a conversation and then I will turn to the audience for questions. So, Mr. Minister.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Because the mic is very far from me. I hope you can hear. Can you hear me?
Maybe if you turn this one on.
Oh, this one. Yeah. Can you hear me now? Oh, thank you. Thank you very much to the Executive Dean of the school for the warm welcome, the leadership of the entire university and the school, and all the luminaries that are here, former ambassadors and role players in the diplomatic space, the university community, and all the stakeholders who joined this engagement. I'm very pleased to be delivering these very short remarks to you and look forward to a more robust engagement. In 1994, South Africa rejoined the international community after years of isolation and grave human rights abuses. The rebirth of our democratic nation is firmly anchored on protecting and promoting human rights and advancing the lives of all South Africans. We remain fundamentally committed to a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and an equal society. And this is what we also extend to the globe in terms of our foreign policy. Before our elections on the 29th of May, 2024, there were many doomsayers who thought that democracy was under threat in our country. But for 30 years and 6 elections organized on time through a 5-year intervals, we have witnessed the peaceful transfer of power in our country from time to time. And this time also was no exception, despite the fact there was a unique thing that happened in the last elections. The once dominant African National Congress, the governing party for the past 30 years in South Africa, a liberation movement, accepted the will of the people and decided to establish a government of national unity. We believe that we stand to date when democracy is under threat across the globe as a bastion of democracy and open society and a free world. With the free media in our country, with an independent judiciary, with very strong institutions embedded in our constitution. We believe this is a sign of a resilient democracy. Our fight against apartheid, racism, white minority domination was a fight for democracy and freedom for all. Our struggle was against one of the most repugnant states of the world, an ostracized state that was declared by the United Nations as a crime against humanity and a threat against international peace and security. This is one of the main reasons why we will speak out against repression, oppression, and genocide wherever we see it. We still grapple with the social and economic legacies of apartheid, past and challenges of the past 80 years. We must overcome deep-seated poverty, excruciating poverty for some, debilitating inequality in the world's most unequal society in our country. It is for this reason that our foreign policy prioritizes economic diplomacy alongside peace diplomacy. Since the dawn of democracy 30 years ago, South Africa has advanced a non-aligned position in our international relations. We never shut the door on peaceful settlements of dispute. We do not believe in a war as a solution to solve problems and disputes among states, within these states, people, and within parties. As our President Cyril Ramaphosa eloquently stated, we have deliberately avoided aligning our country with any of the major powers or blocs. Rather, we have sought to forge cordial relations with all countries. While we have taken a non-aligned position, we continue to pursue positions in line with the UN Charter. As a country of the Global South, South Africa is deeply committed to its Africa agenda. We remain steadfast in our commitment to inclusive human development as the African Union calls silencing of the guns, not just in our continent and the diaspora, but also in the whole globe. We are particularly troubled by the situation in Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where some of you may be aware that through SAMIM DRC, we have sent our defense force to participate in a platform of SAMIM, which is a platform of the of SADC and that of the United Nations in line with the recent Security Council resolutions. And we've done the same in Mozambique, Cabo Delgado, and we do this within the auspices of multilateral bodies in this regard, SADC and the AU, and where there is a UN resolutions also in that regard. As I've said, we are concerned with this instability, including the general instability in the Sahel region and the violence in Haiti. The root causes of coup d'etat or what the African Union calls unconstitutional changes of government, must be addressed, including vestiges of colonialism. There is a revolt by many against external interference and the exploitation of Africa. The indiscriminate killing and suffering of Palestinians in Gaza, especially women and children, is there for all people of the world to see. It starkly reminds us of our own experiences under apartheid. We felt compelled to act when the world stood by and watched as genocide unfolded in Gaza following the October 7 attacks, which the ICJ has found that there is a plausible case of genocide for the state of Israel to answer. Under the Geneva Convention, we are obliged to take Israel to the International Court of Justice to ensure it abides by its obligations. We have argued at the ICJ that genocide is taking place in Palestine, which offends our sense of humanity and solidarity with the oppressed and occupied people fighting for self-determination. The court has agreed that there is indeed a case of plausible genocide in Gaza. South Africa's foreign policy is guided by a constitution and the principles governing international relations enshrined in the UN Charter. The United Nations and the UN Charter is located at the center of our foreign policy. We believe the United Nations is the multilateral platform that all nations of the world should work on to build a rules-based society, but also to ensure the international rule of law. Regarding Russia, we strongly support Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, which prohibits the use of threat or use of force and calls on all members to respect other states' sovereignty, territorial integrity, and to ensure political independence. This must be respected by all nations of the world, and in this regard, Russia too. However, the only way to stop any conflict across the globe, in all our experiences since our democracy, in the African continent, where we've participated in a lot of peace initiatives, and also in other platforms of the world, it is that all parties must engage in a peaceful process, in a dialogue to resolve conflict. And they should be role players, either as countries or through the multilateral platforms. There is no such thing as a just war. There is always a victim, and the whole world has felt the economic effects of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Hence, a team of 7 African presidents led an initiative in mid-2023 to attempt to make peace in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. South Africa remains one of the only countries to talk to President Putin and President Zelensky in Ukraine. War has never ushered in peace. It is our conviction that as ideas of peace talks are looming, the principle as put forward by the African leaders will grow in resonance and importance. And as South Africa, based on our experience, we stand ready to help find a durable solution, which we believe is the only way forward. We are determined to ensure that a credible ceasefire materialized, followed by a dialogue that can lead to a long-lasting solution. We are a country that has sat at the table with our oppressors 30 years ago, and we continue to work with all races, ethnic, religious, and other social groups to build social cohesion. Democracy has continued to thrive from the southmost tip of Africa. We believe that given a chance, dialogue can unite enemies and create bonds that can define peoples beyond their lifetime. In South Africa, we live by a concept called Ubuntu, meaning I am because of who you are, and that we have to share common values. South Africa values its bilateral relations with all countries, including the United States. Both nations have a long-standing history of championing international peace and security and advancing efforts aimed at human development and inclusive societies. Our cooperation with the United States is replete with a lot of examples and a lot of peace initiatives in the African continent. in various places where South Africa plays a role for peace, the United States also does play its own role. But there is an emerging conundrum. Maybe we'll discuss further as we get into the discussion, with more external countries coming into the African continent, complicating some of the resolutions of conflicts that are arising in places like Sudan. There is more external players than the usual players that are found in the continent. We're hoping that this platform will be used as a further opportunity to deepen ties to our two nations. But there should be no doubt that South Africa is deeply committed to a multipolar world order, not one that is dominated by one state and a small grouping of states, a world order that is anchored on multilateralism. Geopolitical rivalries are making the world more unstable, turbulent, uncertain. These volatilities have implications for us all, notable those of us in Africa and the global south. That the world needs is a dialogue amongst and engagements between nations. And the United Nations forums becomes strategic importance in that regard. We also value the work that we have been doing with the United States, particularly on AGOA and PEPFAR. Our economy has benefited greatly through this initiative of AGOA, and we believe that it has also been mutually beneficial to both countries, including the United States. We have also benefited a lot as a country on the PEPFAR program. It has helped our country to increase the life expectancy of our society. There is no gainsaying about the help that the United States of America has contributed in this regard to the nations of South Africa, but not only South Africa, and most of sub-Saharan Africa with this program, which has increased life expectancy. And we are aware that there are points of divergence and differences that do arise from time to time between ourselves and this country. And we believe as they arise, there must be engagements, dialogue to find each other. And if we can't find each other, at least agree to disagree in a respectful manner, because the relationship is important, it's mutually beneficial to both societies. We wish the United States well in the upcoming elections planned for November 2024. And we stand ready for engagement with the new American administration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that really great overview of the priorities. I'm not going to take too much time because I know our audience will have a lot of questions. I wanted to start, you started out South Africa being one of the few bastions of democracy and kind of protection of human rights as a core principle. I wonder, how does that translate in terms of your foreign policy actions? Let's say on the continent, you talked about the slew of unconstitutional of government, coup d'etats across the Sahel, leaders extending their stays in power, citizens who are kind of denied the voice and the right to assemble and protest. And I wonder if you can say a little bit on kind of South Africa's strategy on that. Engagement not only with the governments of those countries, but also the citizens and the civil society.
No, thank you. Indeed, we participate, as I've said, in multilateral platforms, SADC, which we see as a platform to extend our democratic gains, our human rights culture, and so forth. And it is in that platform where we use the various protocols of that platform, which includes also our participation in the African Union, which also has same protocols for the entirety of the continent. And that's where we develop the protocols that must ensure that democracy is preserved and does happen in many parts of the continent, including the issues of the silencing of the guns. But as I've said, that while the protocols have been developed and they do speak to the unconstitutionality of changes of governments and so forth, there is a growing concern that we believe that we need to find new mechanisms to respond to it, particularly in the Sahel region, where you can hear the cry for real freedom by such countries. I mean, you will know in the Sahel, there are countries where bread is flown from another country into that kind of a country. And that is where we do believe through the protocols of the AU on the value additions in the African continent and so forth, which will help to build the capacity. And that's where we appreciate some of the inputs coming from the various multilateral bodies, the AU, the EU itself with the number of instruments, including the United States of America and other countries that also play a role in the continent.
I mean, one of the challenges of the African Union is that many of the member state governments may not be entirely democratic and have less incentive to push on some of those democratic principles. So, do you have ideas of kind of the new mechanisms and kind of new ways of pushing and encouraging democratic transition?
Yes, through the protocols that we continue to push to be developed and be implemented. I mean, on democracy, you can only provide guidelines to a certain extent. But countries still have their own constitutions, but we do play a bigger role to nudge them. And as when situations arise, we do intervene. And the recent one being, you will know, Senegal, after the elections, we all had to play a role for the incumbent to accept the outcomes. We also, it was not easy. I also come from the ANC to accept that for the first time in 30 years, we have lost elections. You know, we had to convince our own members that let's accept this is a reality. I mean, to date, those of you who might be following South African politics, you will know we're still called sellout for working with them. For example, with the Democratic Alliance, which our members or view them as, although they were not part of the apartheid setup, but as representing that status quo, including the Freedom Front Plus. But we believe the decision that we have taken to initiate and form the government of national unity is in the interest of the country. And that is what we're doing to solve the triple challenges that South Africa is facing, which is a lack of economic growth, unemployment, and inequality and poverty.
And as you said, the peaceful transfer of power and acceptance of the results, oops, beg your pardon, is also a powerful example to the continent and to democracies the world over.
Yes.
Switch it. Okay. Beg your pardon. Speaking of the coalition government, and we discussed this a little bit before the session, is there a change in the foreign policy outlook now that it is no longer solely the ANC, that the ANC is no longer the government, but it is a coalition government? And just to follow that, do you see kind of debates and changes of perspective, differences of perspective within that coalition? Maybe you can describe some of that. Are there different forces pushing different directions on foreign policy?
No, there is no different forces pushing in different directions. We think that we are all understanding that we have all to act in the interest of the country. Firstly, our foreign policy is guided by our constitution, which has not changed. And we believe that the Constitution is sacrosanct. It's an important supreme law for the Republic. It can't just be changed willy-nilly. It's also in the interest of advanced democracies that it is known that the Constitution can't just be changed at the whim of situations. So the Constitution is the guide. We also are guided by our national interest document, which I believe some of you who are interested in the country have got, will have some kind of familiarity with the national interest document. Prior to the formation of the government, there was a statement of intent that was agreed upon. And it is also clear in terms of our foreign policy that it should have a human rights outlook. It must advance Agenda 2063 of the AU. It must advance our relations south and north and south cooperation. And that is what we're cultivating in these engagements. Also seeing the BRICS platforms, the G20 platforms as important multilateral institutions for helping us with our developmental agenda. So in a nutshell, the foreign policy position of South Africa hasn't changed. There is an openness to engage, to be persuaded, and that's why we continue to engage with yourselves. There has also been platforms where I am responsible to send a number of ministers in terms of their mandate to various platforms. And some of the platforms requires that a minister who does not come from the governing party, the ANC, must be sent to a platform. I don't say, no, you are from the DA, you can't go there. So we allow them to attend the functions, and up to so far, they have stuck to the constitution of the country, the national interest document, including our agenda in regards to the G20. Because I think all of us understand that our actions should be in the interest of the country.
One final question for me on, the conflict that just does not, and you mentioned it, but that does not get enough attention in the United States in the media, and that is the conflict where some 150 to 200,000 people have been killed, and where does not appear to be an easy solution in sight in the foreseeable future. You mentioned the role of external players in that. South Africa was quite engaged in Sudan in negotiations, but less so. And I wonder if you might say a word on what you see South Africa's role, but what you would like to see in terms of a diplomatic response on Sudan. I think last year, South Africa voted against a UN human rights investigation in Sudan, I believe. And I wonder what you see as kind of a diplomatic coalition and course of action on Sudan.
We in all the conflicts areas or zones, we participate through the auspices of the multilateral bodies that we participate in. SADC, we have participated in the eastern part of the DRC, and we support the AU initiative that is led by the president of Angola, which is called the Luanda process. And we were engaged with that process, and we have welcomed the ceasefire. We are hopeful that it could be sustained. Our defense forces participating through what is called the SAMIM DRC to enable a space of that ceasefire to find a life. We have done the same in Mozambique, Cabo Delgado. And indeed, we also participate through the AU in the Sudan Peace Initiative process. But as you have said, the current conflict has been complicated by a number of factors, including the various external players that have come into the space, other than the usual players that where it becomes easy to engage with the capitals and so forth. In this regard, it's multiplicity of countries which have come into the space, and we view that process of the AU, but it is also our view that the UN Security Council, while we participate and play a role, becomes also very critical to help to also call those capitals of the countries that are largely involved now, which further complicates the Sudan situation.
Thank you. I do want to turn to our audience. We have some super knowledgeable people here. For questions, I have an initial question from Bob, and then the gentleman here, and then microphone's coming. Please identify yourself. And do you mind if we take 3 questions at a time?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. My name is Bob Berg, and I was senior advisor to various parts of the UN large agencies and chaired groupings here and in London on peace. So I very much welcomed your excellent statement emphasizing peace and the multilateral system. Alas, last year, much less than 10% of all conflicts were settled peacefully. And so people are looking for ways to bolster what the multilateral platforms that you mentioned. And I'm wondering whether you have some favorite ways to suggest, because that will be topical at the UN coming up. And also, we hear far too little about what the future of the BRICS is. And as a co-founder of it, as you look ahead in the years ahead, what do you hope the BRICS will be doing on major global issues such as peace? Thank you, sir.
Gentleman in the green.
All right. Sorry. My name is Matthew, and I'm a student at the Elliott School, and I worked with the Corporate Council in Africa. And it's great to have you here with us. And like you mentioned earlier, that you support a multipolar world order, and you also mentioned that that the multiple nations in Sudan kind of complicates that conflict. The multiple foreign interventions complicates the Sudanese war. So, like, how would you conflate the two, like the advocacy for a multipolar order and like support for the complexity of multiple actors in the same conflict?
Very interesting. Ready. Oh, sorry. Ready. Oh, okay. We'll come back to you. Yeah, the gentleman. Okay. Go.
Good afternoon, Minister. My name is Reddy. I'm a South African journalist based in DC. You had a smile when you were talking about looking forward to working to the new US administration, but I'd like to know how worried is South Africa, and what does your risk analysis tell you about the impact of a Trump presidency on South Africa's trajectory? And I think the context is important here because there's some geopolitical tension from our position on Russia and Ukraine, and of course, Israel, and already the relationship, even in the Biden administration, is quite tense. You've had to go on a charm offensive. Various ministers have been coming here. Even your predecessor expressed optimism about the relationship with the Biden administration, but acknowledged the tension with some lawmakers in the US. So I guess in answering that, reminding ourselves of what a Trump presidency looked like a couple of years ago, more protectionism, nativism, inward-looking, a nationalistic kind of impulse, and even economically, a very unorthodox economic policy that would have an impact on the performance of the dollar, inflationary outcomes that would then impact Africa's debt servicing potential. So taking all of that into account, we can smile and giggle about it, but what is your plan? Have you done a risk analysis? What's your preference? And what are you going to do when you wake up on November 6th or 7th and you have Trump as the incoming president?
Okay, some easy questions for you to start.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the questions. And the first one, what is our view with regards to,
Favorite ways to bolster multilateral institutions to play the role
yeah,
and then
yes.
the future of the BRICS, yeah.
As you are aware, we have been proponents or advocates of the reform of the UN itself, and in particular the UN Security Council. We have called through the Izulwini Consensus, which is the position of the African Union for 2 seats for the African continent with a veto power. There has been debate for some years as to whether this is possible, whether countries agree or not. But we are excited about the Summit of the Future that we believe it's a step in the right direction to take us somewhere with these reforms. And we also welcome the announcement by the United States of America in support of 2 seats for Africa or for the AU at the UN Security Council. The only difference with the Izulwini Consensus, which is the position of the AU, is that the AU's position says the 2 seats of the Security Council must have a veto power for the African continent. The US says only 2 seats with no veto power. We think this might be different, but at least a step in the right direction, that there is now one of the P5 members speaking on this issue. I think that this could lead to a real conversation about the reform of the Security Council and also the allocation of the seats to the African continent. And we look forward also to that end product in line with our Izulwini Consensus. But as I've said, we remain open to be persuaded and also engage with the US position, which we believe is a good start. With what do we view BRICS? It's a future. We see it as a platform that will continue to enable developing countries like ourselves in that platform to be able to build a trading bloc to respond to the challenges of inequality and so forth in our own countries, to respond to the common agenda of ending poverty. And we think that this building block remains very important even in the future, to be able to trade, to also build a block of trading with each other. And we don't view this as a platform that is anti any country. And that's why from all the declarations, there's no statement anti anyone, but it's saying this is how we need to go forward with the building of the block and the development. With regards to the multiplicity of nations in South Sudan and our support for a multipolar world, yes, we do support a multipolar world, but we're not supporting them to go and cause war. You know,
Something about the order. World.
Yeah, so I think maybe that's the difference here with regard to Sudan, that there's various players who are aiding the conflict, the various parties involved in the conflict, in one way or the other, support them through resourcing, financially, guns, and all that, weapons. That's what we mean, that this has now really complicated the situation. But if those countries are coming in to help to find a solution to call all the parties to sit down to resolve the conflict, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a dilemma there of kind of the breakdown of some kind of order. But
Yeah.
let's turn back. I know there was a question in. Oh, Reedy's question. I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, the last one. I forgot it. Maybe it's because it's the most difficult one for me. Because now, because now it wants me to venture into into the territory of the United States in terms of the outcomes of the elections. Indeed, we are doing our own assessment of the environment of the elections processes. Every self-respecting nation is interested in the elections in the United States. There is no one who is not interested. We're also interested, and we're looking with keen interest the developments that are unfolding, the processes, the campaigns, and the voting that is going to happen. And we say that we wish you well because we are hopeful that the elections will indeed go well, will produce an outcome that will be accepted. I think that is also very important, that the outcomes of the elections are accepted, because as I've said, we accepted the outcomes of the elections, and we view this as an example. And it's not that there were no challenges in our elections process. Those that follow the South African media or processes, you will know that this was the most difficult elections to be run by our electoral agents. We had huge challenges, queue, the voting QR codes, challenges of ballots, counting, all manner of challenges you can find in elections happened. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. At some point, 2 hours of glitches in the voting board. But we said, despite all these challenges, we accept these outcomes because it will not be in the interest of the country to go back and want to dig challenges and that these elections were not free and fair. So we believe the elections were free and fair. The challenges were not material. We needed to accept the outcomes. And I'm also a senior member of the ANC. As the ANC, we said this must be accepted. With all its challenges, let's accept these outcomes. I believe this is a lesson that we can give to this very old democracy in the world.
Thank you. Oh, go to the gentleman back.
Thank you, Minister. My name is Guy. I'm a master's student. You mentioned briefly the G20. So next year, South Africa will take over the G20 presidency from Brazil. I was wondering if you could speak about some of the priority areas and what you hope to achieve through that forum next year. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have Professor Harrison up first. And then we'll go, did I say the quote? Oh. We'll come to police and then we'll do another.
Good afternoon and welcome again. My name is Lakeisha Harrison. I am Assistant Dean of Student Services and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the Elliott School and a Professor of African Studies here. My question is about the African diaspora and what role that plays in your efforts as a Minister of Foreign Affairs. And in particular, I'm going to dig down and be specific here. Quite often in today's terms, when we talk about the African diaspora, there is an assumption that it refers to the immigrant population of the African diaspora across the world exclusively. But of course, we know there are Africans who come from the descendant community who have been around the world for hundreds of years. So what is your plan to engage with the descendant African population around the world as a part of your diplomatic efforts to engage in international affairs, and how they might be included in your policy, or even included potentially within South Africa, opportunities for dual citizenship or opportunities for additional investment? And I know in the prior meeting, we talked a lot about AGOA, and that has been a major vehicle in the United States for African Americans to engage in South Africa. But I would like to know how the African descendant community plays a role in your policy for international affairs.
Let's go to Alyssa Moredu and then we'll.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Palisa. I'm also a South African writer based here in Washington, D.C. Minister, welcome to Washington. It's good to see you. I have two questions. The first question, I really want to take you to the war in Ukraine, the invasion of Russia, invasion of Ukraine by Russia. As you would know, that the Ukrainians regard that invasion, that war, as a genocidal war on their own country, especially when you recall that they made this very explicit when the atrocities were committed in Bucha, in Mariupol, and Kharkiv. And I just wanted to check with you, what is your response to their framing of that war as a genocidal war against their country? That's the first question. The second question that I have is a very practical one. Is when do we get a permanent ambassador here in Washington?
Very soon.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much for the questions. With regards to the G20, we will continue with the agenda that was started in Indonesia, India, and Brazil to consolidate and find mechanisms, tools of monitoring and implementations of such decisions. We will also include in our program the agenda for the African continent, in particular in the context of Agenda 2063 of the AU, including the financing mechanisms, developmental finance issues. And as you are aware, the continent, one of the challenges we have is the debt problems that many of our countries face. So that will be part of our agenda, including the issues of climate change, the just transition, how we finance it. As you are aware, we had huge challenges in our country of energy security, which we believe we have now turned the corner. And we believe this is also one of the greatest examples of a functioning democracy. We are looking forward to that engagement, that the transition must be just. It must carry along our population so that we don't just create, we find ourselves with ghost towns, particularly in the former coal areas as we transition. So the people involved in the coal mining and coal power stations, the skills and all that, we must transition in a pace that takes them along, reskilling, repurposing, and so forth. So that will be part also of our key agenda of as we move to this low carbon emissions program. So we see this platform of the G20 as very important to drive this agenda. And last one is about the
Africa diaspora.
Oh, the African diaspora. We also engage with it at that platform of the AU, led by by Ghana and also Togo. And we participate in the resolutions and also as a member state of the AU, and also ourselves as we engage South Africa's foreign affairs, we do engage with the African diaspora in the many parts of the world. The one that I don't think we've had an engagement on is the issue of citizenship. I don't think we have had a discussion about offering citizenship to in that regard, but we have, through the platforms of the AU, continued to call for the implementation of the Durban conference on racism, xenophobia, and related intolerance resolutions, with regards to reparations, how it will be done, with regards to the various issues of interest. And we are hopeful that the Lome process will catalyze the clear direction in terms of where we need to, in terms of that resolution, how we resolve it. But we call for that implementation, and we see the African diaspora as very strategic, including at the level of investment. They are very welcome to invest in our country, and processes through our DTIC can direct in terms of how. But we see also as a very important platform of exchange of skills and knowledge and all that. And I must say that I have seen here in the US, they've played a very progressive role, particularly in the anti-apartheid movement, the civil rights movement. Same in the Great Britain. One of the biggest ever done celebration of South Africa's democracy, 30 years of South Africa's democracy, was in the United Kingdom at the Westminster, organized by the anti-apartheid movement and the African diaspora. It was a marvelous event of celebration of democracy. Our response to the Ukraine call, viewing the war within the lens of genocidal, we, as you will have seen, even in the context of Gaza, we view all issues through the platforms of the United Nations, through those multilateral platforms and through that lens. And it is through that participation that we continue to call for the respect of the territorial independence and sovereignty of Ukraine. And we continue to call for the respect of the UN Charter. With regards to the ambassador, it's a process that I can say, put my head on the block, that it will be very soon. And soon, this time, I really mean soon.
Okay.
I know that, as politicians, when we say soon,
Yeah.
you might think that it might take many years.
We have time for one more round, because I know Ben had a question. I want to make sure, this gentleman here in the second row, and then over here, Nick.
Sir, thank you so much for coming to talk. Ben Caruth, I'm a graduate student here at the Elliott School. My question's about external influence on countries' internal affairs, right? So FOCAC was a couple of weeks ago in the action plan out of FOCAC. There was several mentions, and it's a kind of theme on FOCAC action plans about how China would not interfere with a country's internal politics, how there's no political strings attached to aid that's given. I read that as maybe an implicit critique of how the United States hands aid out in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically attaching like human rights conditions and political conditions to aid sometimes. One, is that fair for me to read that as a critique? Is that where South Africa stands? Second, in 1986, the U.S. passed the Anti-Apartheid Act that placed sanctions on the apartheid government in South Africa as an example of us showing our values. But that would also be an example of maybe U.S. internal affairs in South Africa government. Is that a fair like a judgment of that, or kind of where does South Africa stand on that as a whole?
Thank you, Ben. Where did I say yes?
Hi, Mr. Minister. Thank you for coming to Washington. My name is Bryson Handy. I'm a sophomore undergrad, and I work with the campus organization Young Black Professionals in International Affairs. My question refers to the DRC. You mentioned your country's involvement in the Luanda process, as well as the new SADC mission to the Eastern DRC. Of course, that mission is entering as the East African Communities mission is drawing down. And that mission had many struggles, and its accomplishments are unclear. So how do the goals of the SADC mission reference the experiences of the East African Communities intervention in the DRC?
Great questions. What did I say for the last? Nick, yes, behind.
Thank you. Nicholas Cook at the Congressional Research Service. Two quick questions. I understand there is to be possibly a new case lodged before the ICJ. Is that an entirely new case or is it a continuation of the current one? And then with regard to China, are you concerned at all about power asymmetries between China and its partners in FOCAC? And do you see the need for a more cohesive African, joint African policy, promoting African agency and a more coordinated policy among African countries vis-a-vis China? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. With regards to our participation in multilateral platforms, including FOCAC, as you're aware, we obviously participate in the negotiations of the declaration or the joint statement. So as we engage with China, we look at our relationship with China and our own bilateral and so forth. And we think in the context of the history of colonialism in the African continent, it was important that the statement must be clear, that this is not, there will be no any form of interference in the continent and all. It must be a neutral type of help that is free of conditions. In that context, in our view, we don't view it as a reference to the United States. We view it as as a multilateral platform for FOCAC in relations to China. And we thought it was important that the statement must be clear, send a clear signal to the African community that there will be no interference in the domestic affairs of African countries. Indeed, to juxtapose your question with his question, we at the AU level, we are concerned about these multilateral platforms organized by individual countries. Hence, there's a discussion at the AU about the partnership strategy at all these platforms. You name them, TICAD, the ones we also have here with the US, and all of them, including the one which has recently had, that the AU must have a clear partnership strategy in all this, all these platforms. You will be aware that this discussion started some years ago, and the last meeting of the AU did not conclude on the strategy. We are hopeful that in the near future we'll be able to conclude on the strategy so that we speak in one voice. There's cohesion, and also there is a clear alignment in terms of the strategy of what we intend to achieve. So that is a clear goal of of the African Union. And with regards to the Eastern DRC, the Luanda process is an initiative that had referenced the East Africa Initiative as led by President Ruto. And that's why we all converged on it and say we need to give it a chance and a space. And that is the aim of the SAMIM DRC, is to enable a dialogue, political engagement to have a space. And the president of Angola has engaged and is continuing to engage with the president of Rwanda, of Uganda, and all the role players in the conflict, and also the relevant government of the DRC. And he has also have continuous engagement with our president to give feedback and to exchange some notes in terms of how we take this process forward, because we believe that military intervention will not resolve the problem. There must be a political process that all the parties must commit to. That what will end up helping us with a long-term solution to the situation in the Eastern DRC. And we have an example. We believe we have an example with the SAMIM intervention in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, which has been largely successful. And we have withdrawn now. We hear that it's stable. There could be challenges into the future, and we remain ready to continue to help. But the aim of our military intervention in all these platforms is to give this initiative and engagements a chance. The issue regarding to whether there's a new case at the ICJ, I suspect that you might have heard about our filing of the memorial, because the first process was an interim, what you in domestic law you could call interim relief. It was not the final arbiter or case in the matter. The final one will now come through this process where we now, by the end of October, South Africa needs to file what is called a memorial by the court. But in layman's language is to file the evidence that you have accused this country of this crime. Now show yourself. That is what is we're expected to do in October, and we are planning to do so. So maybe what has led to the noise is the rumors that there could have been some intention to stop us and that, but we don't know whether it's true or not. No one has stopped us, and we are preparing to file the memorial. So I think that is what we have heard. The memorial relates to the main case now that we will be dealt with on the merits. I think I've responded to your question on the China-Africa relationship. Thank you.
We are at time. I just want to thank all of you for really excellent questions. And I want to thank you, Mr. Minister, for fielding such a broad range of questions. You know, the thing that came through to me in this conversation is kind of that need for constant engagement. I think Pelesa's question about an ambassador, as I've said, is a key one. And on areas of disagreement and identifying even greater areas of convergence of interests, engagement is the key. So we will welcome you back to the Elliott School at any time. And we really thank you for this conversation that was really rich and informative. So thank you so much.
This is a good example that indeed South Africa is a democracy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Questions from students, you know, you're
Thank you.